Chapter 18 of Fact Stranger Than Fiction by John Patterson Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Home again. I have a confession to make. It is that for fear of being discriminated against on account of being a colored man, I had shipped both when alone and when with my family on a Cunarder, where I felt sure no prescription would be made, and I'm free to state that my anticipations in this behalf were fully realized. However, there came a time when, being a little anxious to return to our home without unnecessary delay, we shipped on the good United States ship New York, with more or less of fear and trembling, I must admit, yet boldly and with the face and front of an American citizen. During the entire trip from Southampton to New York, our treatment by everyone was kindly and considerate, and when it became generally known that the good people of our dear Cleveland had so often and so lavishly honored me in public ways, the committee appointed to arrange the details of the customary entertainment on the homeward voyage invited me to preside as chairman of the function, which I did with pleasure and apparent satisfaction. Returning from Liverpool on the Campania in 1895, I was one of 1,000 who listened with much interest to the animated, eloquent presentation of the socialist cause by J. Keir Hardie, M.P., who was en route to the United States for the purpose of laying the cause of British workmen before the American public. The meeting was held amidship, where all classes of passengers from the steerage to the first cabin could collect and listen. The learned gentleman, the sea being calm, spoke for nearly an hour, and was attentively listened to without interruption. Following the speech of Keir Hardie, a disposition became manifest to have him answered, and during the same day a delegation of the passengers requested me to undertake that delicate and difficult task at the same place on the following day. I'll say I was not at all averse to attempting the task, though I fully realized that, in Keir Hardie, I had found a foeman more than worthy of my steel. On the occasion of my reply, the weather and sea were again auspicious, and the audience larger, perhaps, than on the day before. That I did my possible, as the French sometimes express it, goes without saying, and many compliments came to me from that portion of the audience who believed in the perpetuity of the established order of things social in England and the United States. The honored and regretted late citizen Judge Stephenson Burke, when in conversation with the writer on one occasion, exclaimed in substance as follows: "My father went into the woods and cut down the trees and pulled up the stumps and grubbed up the roots and plowed up the soil. Now, if any man wants to get the land from me, let him pay its full value or keep silent." In my address on the Campania, I considered my most telling point, if I may so characterize it, that one where I differentiate between the status of the middle classes in a monarchy and those in our great republic, where every man is in theory and law at least the equal of every other man, and may, if he will, aspire to any position within the gift of the people. I strove to maintain by my arguments that socialism, anarchism, and all other doctrines of a kindred nature are exotics which should be shunned as being hostile to our well-being. I still am actuated by those and kindred feelings, and have put forth every reasonable effort to instill those ideas into the minds and hearts of my colored fellow citizens. Since our last sojourn in foreign lands, I have been plodding along in the humble sphere of a private citizen, busy in the practice of the law of the land, and cultivating as best I could the friendly relations of all good people. But there is one episode of my life, extending over a period of at least 20 years, of which I must make mention. I might say, in truth, 44 years, for the mutual acquaintance of Mr. Theodore Bliss of Philadelphia and myself came down from 1866 to the year of his death, 1910. But during the first period mentioned, 20 years, we were mutual correspondents, a relationship which only death terminated. When I say mutual correspondence, I would be understood to mean that I wrote to him perhaps 50 letters where he favored me with one, and then only a few lines which were painfully executed by spelling the words one letter at a time and conjoining them. His talented daughter, Miss Anna Catherine Bliss, occasionally acted as an amanuensis for him, and wrote to me for him. Mr. Theodore Bliss was of old New England stock, was born in 1822, and died in 1910 when he was in his 89th year of age. In the forepart of this narrative I have made mention of this same gentleman, but this story is added as a special token of my love of his memory, and my gratitude for tokens of friendly consideration shown me by him. For 51 years Mr. Bliss was afflicted with a disease which I've learned physicians cannot cure. They name it rheumatoid arthritis, a disease which he first noticed in his right shoulder in 1859, but which continued to develop until his death 51 years afterwards. Some idea of his sad plight may be formed by his brief description of it. Hear him. One joint after another has been distorted, and the limbs bound, until I could no longer move about on cane or crutches, and was forced to the continuous use of a wheel-chair. Again, he says in a little biographical sketch of himself, I can honestly say that I would not wish my worst enemy to suffer as I have, to have had the fate of being bound hand and foot and imprisoned within an invalid's chamber while the mind remained clear and active and still alert to the affairs of everyday life. Yet, he says a little farther down, in my extreme old age, I can say with perfect sincerity that I would live this life of mine all over again gladly, even including this long period of illness, for in this 88th year of my age, life seems to me a very little and short experience. Hours for sleep, for rest, and for refreshment shorten these years greatly, when measured by activity, by the accomplishment of results. The late George Bliss of New York was a brother of this Theodore Bliss, and, as every one of mature years will bear witness, was a great financial power in that great city. And for many years prior to the year 1868, when he united with Levi P. Morton, George Bliss was the head of the renowned importing dry goods house of George Bliss and Company, which is of historic note amongst the dry goods houses of America. During the time which elapsed between the death of Mr. Theodore Bliss' elder daughter, who was in the habit of writing a letter to him every week, as he informed me, and his death more than 20 years, I did not fail in a single instant to write and mail to Mr. Bliss on the same day of the week a letter containing 1,000 words more or less, but generally more, and even when I was on the high seas or doing political stumping, I took time to write and mail that letter on the ship or in a post office. Every Christmas he mailed me his check for $50, coupling with it a request that I give $5 of it to my late beloved and regretted son, Theodore Bliss Green, named for him, and when he died by the terms of his will, I received the sum of $500. Nearly all of my most readable books are testimonials of his bounty, and in that sense he was largely instrumental in enriching my mind with English classic lore, for it is quite doubtful whether I had the talent to select my necessary reading matter as he skillfully did. When I visited Philadelphia, his residence in the fashionable part of the city was my home, and although he could not even put on his eyeglasses or feed himself, yet when I visited him for a few hours I was constrained to dine with him and his good family, when he would be brought down from his room and placed at the table, a circumstance I was informed which very seldom took place. When he died I was duly notified of the fact by his daughter, by telegram, and at the funeral I rode in one of the carriages with members of his and George Bliss's family at the home. I was treated in all respects as a gentleman and social equal. To my mind, the foregoing is a most remarkable instance, going to prove that even in the face of race prejudice and caste, which in some instances is so dense that it can almost be felt, a colored person in the United States can make a place for himself in the hearts and homes of the foremost white citizens by modest, respectful, and honorable conduct in his daily walk in life. The foregoing is not written boastfully, but encouragingly, for the benefit of such of my class as have the ambition and persistency to make the test. I have at my home the copy of the Holy Bible which Mr. Bliss kept near him for his personal use as long as he could turn the leaves of it. It was sent to me by his children after his death, and I treasure it more than I can tell. He was a good, benevolent man, with a mind clear and vigorous, even in his 88th year of age, when he was utterly helpless as to all his limbs, even down to his fingers. By the assistance of others he could read all the current literature, and reflection was always with him. He died hating shams and dishonesty. I consider that I am honoring my class of colored Americans in referring to the Right Reverend W. A. Leonard as our friend in need, and indeed we almost crossed each other en route, he to Cleveland to undertake his new and strenuous duties, I to Washington, where for years he had labored in the vineyard and made his name from the White House and Capitol down to the humblest Negro a household word. In my offices, where, as United States postage stamp agent, I was in official touch with a number of most estimable ladies of his good works were frequently mentioned, and his name was revered, so that it is not to be wondered at that on my return to Cleveland after an absence of nearly a decade, I lost no time in finding him and placing myself as well as my family under his spiritual guidance. Our good bishop, who is known and esteemed all over the civilized portion of the globe, is regarded by those near him as a man of great executive ability, a born leader of men, a true American, yet cosmopolitan to the backbone. He is possessed of a heart so large and a spirit so expanded that his sympathies for the needy are redundant, and his generosity in behalf of the poor is unbounded. And these views are not restricted to the members and friends of St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, colored, of Cleveland, and St. Mary's Mission, colored, of Washington, D.C., but by all colored people who know him without regard to their religious affiliations. I repeat the language of the late Mrs. John D. Rockefeller, when speaking of her husband's relation to Spelman Institute of Atlanta, Georgia. Bishop Leonard for many years literally carried both of those colored churches under his arm, and even today, since St. Andrew's has become under the masterful guidance of Reverend B. Wellington Paxton and Reverend Friar B.W. Southern, her rector, a self-sustaining church, our good bishop relaxes not one whit of his paternal, loving, affectionate watchfulness. When it comes to a consideration of individuals, our bishop is no respecter of persons, and has never been known, as I am informed, to call any man whom God hath cleansed common or unclean. And in stating this fact, I speak entirely within my own personal observation and experience. The readers of this narrative will bear in mind the letter of introduction given to me by our bishop for presentation to the Lord Bishop of London, an august and potential personage in the personnel of the great British Empire. How respectfully it referred to me, and what beautiful language it was couched in, so much so indeed that the great prelate returned it to me after reading and admiring it, to be kept as a souvenir of the memorable conference which it procured for me with him. If any further proof were needed of the disinterested and loving personality of our dear bishop, the following, I'm sure, would satisfy every one. 3054 Euclid Avenue, Cleveland. Honorable J.P. Green, London, England. Dear Sir, many thanks for your kind note of March 9th, just received. I trust that by this time you have met the Lord Bishop of London. You will find him certainly a very agreeable and interesting personality. You will be sorry to know that dear Mrs. Mather has departed this life, and that we buried her 6 weeks ago. She was a saint and universally beloved in the town which her presence has graced and her benedictions have enriched. Faithfully yours, William A. Leonard. Can the writer conceive of any sentiments purer and more abounding in that divine love and friendship which flows only from the inspired service of our blessed Father in heaven? Now here is the last one, which I select from several communications with which our bishop has kindly favored me, and I include this only that I may follow it with the beautiful lines to which he refers. The Bishop of Ohio, 3054 Euclid Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. Honorable John P. Green, Cleveland, Ohio. My dear friend, it is very kind of you to send me this beautiful poem, which I herewith return, because I know you will want to keep it. Surely the gift of music is in the soul of the writer. What a privilege to have such friends and associates in life. As you are aware, the Reverend Mr. Southern has agreed to come by the 15th of May, which I think is absolutely essential as far as our work is concerned. With all good wishes, I am faithful yours, William A. Leonard. The poem referred to follows. Tonight, an evening prayer. For all who watch tonight, whate'er the dread may be, we ask for them the perfect peace of hearts that rest in thee. For all who weep tonight, the hearts that cannot rest, reveal thy love, that wondrous love which gave for us thy best. For all who wake tonight, love's tender watch to keep, Watcher divine, thyself draw nigh, thou who dost never sleep. For all who fear tonight, whate'er the dread may be, we ask for them thy perfect peace of hearts that rest in thee. Our own beloved tonight, O Father, keep and where our love and succor cannot reach, now bless them through our prayer. And all who pray tonight, thy wrestling hosts, O Lord, make weakness strong, let them prevail according to thy word. It may not be amiss to state in this connection that, inspired by the guardian care and the spiritual example of Bishop Leonard and the faithful pastors whom he has placed over us, I have added to the 6 years of unfailing attendance at St. Luke's Church in Washington, D.C., 14 other years since our return to Cleveland, making 20 years in all since I have missed a morning service when in Cleveland, and that during the same period of time I have not been 1 minute late. By the courtesy of our rectors, I officiate as lay reader during their absence or sickness, and during one interregnum, or spring and summer. I discharged the duties of a lay reader until a rector was obtained. It is unnecessary, perhaps, to say, I love thy church, O Lord. During my long residence of 63 years in the city of Cleveland, excepting several periods of time when absent on business or pleasure bent, it has been my good fortune to become acquainted to a greater or less degree with a large number of very prominent gentlemen and ladies of both races, some of whom I have already referred to in a casual way. And since some of these have in many ways contributed largely towards such success as I have attained to, it would seem that in this my life story I should at least mention a few of them by name, nor am I quite certain that were I to acquaint them with this intention on my part, they would yield their consent, since in only a few instances have I been received by them in their homes or as personal domestic associates. However, since I have only good to speak of them, I will draw my bow at a venture. In every instance where in the following I shall submit the copy of a letter, I shall retain in my possession the original for the inspection of any one who may desire to read it. The first one is from the late President James A. Garfield, to whose residence and mentor I conducted a delegation of 300 colored voters at a time in his presidential campaign when it was easily apparent that he needed votes. The book to which he refers in the letter is one which I hurriedly wrote, to be used to some extent in that same campaign, and while I secured a copyright in the Congressional Library, yet it was anonymously issued. The title of the book is Recollections of the Carolinas. Mr. J.P. Green, Mentor, Ohio, August 22, 1880. My dear sir, Mr. Sherwin kindly loaned me a copy of your book a few days ago, and though I did not have the time to read it in full, I looked it over carefully and was much pleased to see a subject of such importance so well handled. Congratulating you upon your success, I am very truly yours, J. A. Garfield. The next letter which I shall submit is from the late Senator, Secretary of the Treasury, and Secretary of State, John Sherman. The last time this great statesman was elected to the United States Senate, I, as a member of the Ohio Senate, had the honor of voting for him. I have hanging near me now a portrait of him presented by him to me, with his autograph subscribed. Senate Chamber, Washington, D.C., December 18, 1893. To whom it may concern, I take pleasure in commending Honorable John P. Green, now a member of the Senate of Ohio, from the city of Cleveland, to the kindly favor of Americans abroad, with whom he may come in contact. He is a man of literary attainments, a good speaker of excellent character and standing, and influential among the colored people of Ohio. Very respectfully, John Sherman. The third letter is one recently received from ex-Governor Myron T. Herrick, more recently Ambassador to France, whose signal and very valuable services, not more to France and the Allies than to the United States, have gained for him not only universal approbation, but also the respect and love of many. Myron T. Herrick, July 22, 1919. Dear Mr. Green, I was deeply touched by your most kind letter of reminiscences. I well remember you when you came to Cole's nasty old law offices long, long ago. You were a young, earnest man, and you have fulfilled the promise of those years of your adolescence to be a valuable man for your city and your country. I congratulate you upon your anniversary, for you have been an honor to the city of your choice for 62 years, as you will be until the end of your days. Long and late may be the day. Thank you for your letter. I appreciate it deeply. Yours, Myron T. Herrick. The following letter is from the pen of the late Booker T. Washington, who needs no introduction anywhere in the civilized world. To the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, June 15, 1914, to whom it may concern. This is to state that I have known for a number of years the Honorable John P. Green of Cleveland, Ohio. Mr. Green has held several important public positions both in the state and national government. Besides, in his profession as a lawyer, he stands eminently high, and as a public speaker he is a man who commands the highest respect and who makes an address which is instructive, inspiring, and interesting. He knows the condition of the Negro race in this country, and can be depended upon to give interesting information concerning the progress of our race. I commend him to all into whose hands this letter may fall. Booker T. Washington. The next letter is from Mr. Daniel Murray, colored assistant librarian of the Congressional Library, who is stationed in the Capitol during the sessions of Congress, where his position is absolutely unique, for the reason that he can furnish precedents and other information to senators and representatives when in the act of speaking on any reasonable subject of past legislation. Library of Congress, Washington, D.C., September 20th, 1915. My dear friend Green, I'm very glad to receive your communication and will avail myself of the data in perfecting my sketch of you. I had already gathered much concerning your wonderful career, but am no less grateful to receive this supplementary data. I hope our friend George A., referring to Mr. George A. Myers of Cleveland, Ohio, is all right. I note what you say of the Labor Day matter. I've already given you credit for introducing and having passed the Ohio legislation making the day a legal holiday. The Eagle, a local published here, has an editorial on a visit made to you in Cleveland. It is well written and fully deserved. Wishing you every blessing and long life to enjoy the same, I beg to remain very sincerely yours, Daniel Murray. To Honorable John Patterson Green, Cleveland, Ohio. The following is a letter from Reverend Charles F. Thwing, D.D., President of Western Reserve University, Adelbert College, Cleveland, Ohio, and speaks for itself. May 6, 1916. My dear Mr. Green, it is kind in you to write me as you do and to let me share with you in the pleasure of these letters of Mr. Bliss and Mr. Richards. At the present moment there is no opportunity. In fact, also the larger share of our special lectures for the next college year have been arranged, but at some time I'm sure a fitting opportunity will open for you to come to us. When this opportunity does open, I shall give myself the pleasure of inviting you. I wish that we might meet oftener. We have so many great subjects in common to talk about. Believe me, ever yours, Charles F. Thwing, John P. Green, Esquire. Here is another, City of Cleveland, Ohio, Mayor's Office. This is to certify that Honorable John P. Green, member of the Ohio Senate, has been for many years a resident of Cleveland, of good standing in the community. He is a lawyer by profession, a contributor to journals and magazines, and enjoys an excellent reputation as a public speaker. He is also deservedly entitled to praise for his intelligent industry and credit for his ability. I cheerfully commend Mr. Green to the courtesies of those whom he may meet. Robert Blee, Mayor. I have the honor to submit the following from one of the judges of our Court of Common Pleas, County of Cuyahoga, Thomas M. Kennedy, Judge, Cleveland, Ohio, June 22, 1914, to whom it may concern. I have known Mr. John P. Green for 30 years and can certify that he has borne an excellent character as a lawyer and a citizen both in private and public life during all of that time. He has been signally honored by his state and nation and has rendered distinguished services to the public for many years. He is an eloquent and graceful speaker at the bar and on the public platform, and a man of high character and unquestioned integrity. Very respectfully, Thomas M. Kennedy, Judge. In addition to the foregoing, I have letters highly complimentary from judges, governors, United States senators, and very prominent businessmen, but I feel sure my readers will have been quite surfeited with what I have already given. I shall include 2 others, however, as they are from men of universal note, and I think will be appreciated. The first is from the late Frederick Douglass, a man born and raised, I cannot say reared, of a person who by the law of the land and by his treatment was a mere chattel in slavery, who carried on his back the scars of the driver's whip, who had one of his eyes blinded, who never attended school a day in his whole life, and yet was the associate of eminent scholars and officials, and was noted the world over as an orator, statesman, and philosopher. The letter follows. Cedar Hill, Anacostia, D.C., March 6, 1893. My dear Mr. Green, I'm pleased to know that you are about to treat yourself to a tour abroad. There was a time when I could have assisted you in the manner you suggest, but that was nearly 50 years ago. I went to England in 1845. Then I knew John Bright, Richard Cobden, George Thompson, Joseph Sturge, George W. Alexander, and many other influential men. But now all are gone, and I alone am left to tell this. You will take with you my high regards and best wishes for your safety and happiness while on sea and land, and a warm welcome home, when you shall return. Though I know but few in England now, there are many who know of me, and you may perhaps use my name to some with whom you may meet. Your friend, Frederick Douglass. The following letter from Dr. John Clifford, Doctor of Divinity, Doctor of Letters, is in answer to an invitation mailed to him by me in the summer of 1911, when he made his last visit to this country, asking him to spend a few days at least in our great city of Cleveland. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, June 24, 1911. Many thanks, my dear friend, for your letter. It is refreshing to hear from you in your own land. I wish I could come and see you. It would be a great joy to me to come to Cleveland, but I have not a spare day, nor can I make one. It was a real pleasure to meet Mr. Rockefeller, and the short chat that I had with him was most pleasant. Please remember us to Mrs. Green, and accept the assurance of my keen regret that I cannot see you. We are having a grand time here, thanks to the overflowing generosity of our American friends. I'm truly yours, John Clifford. In closing the foregoing letter, may I not add that prior to the World War, Dr. Clifford was reputed to be the most influential man in Great Britain, the Prime Minister alone being excepted. In view of the fact that the writer of the following letter has recently been nominated by the great Republican Party as its standard-bearer for the high office of President of the United States, and the omens for his election all seem auspicious, I'm of opinion it will be read with a very great degree of interest. The circumstances which caused Senator Harding to write me this letter, as far back as the latter part of December 1918, a year and a half before his nomination, are as follows. I wrote a letter to Mr. Dan R. Hanna, protesting against the apparent efforts of himself and other great men of the country looking towards the nomination of the late lamented ex-President Theodore Roosevelt for the presidency in 1920. A copy of which I mailed to Senator Harding at Washington, enclosing with the same a letter to the Senator in which I suggested that he, and not the distinguished ex-President, was the logical and probable nominee for President in 1920. To this communication I received the following letter from Senator Harding. Committee on Commerce, December 27, 1918. Mr. John P. Green, 510 Blackstone Building, Cleveland, Ohio. My dear Mr. Green, thank you very much for your note and the copy of the letter which you wrote to Mr. Hanna under recent date. This is all very interesting to me. I know Mr. Hanna is a very great and enthusiastic supporter of Colonel Roosevelt, and I happen to know that Roosevelt's candidacy for the Republican nomination in 1920 is being very vigorously pushed along. I do not pretend to say who will be the best standard-bearer for 1920. Many things may happen before that time arrives. It will not surprise me if we choose our standard-bearer with some very serious consideration of the conditions which obtain at that time. I think I ought to say to you that I have no ambition of my own to serve in this matter. I do hope the Republican party will be wise enough to pursue the only course which will ensure to us the recovery of federal control. I thank you for your interest and your friendly attitude. Wishing you a very happy New Year. I am very truly yours, W. G. Harding. An incident of a political nature in which the late Tom L. Johnson was the central figure may be of interest to some of the readers of this narrative. Considerable interest centered around the congressional contest between this distinguished Clevelander and Theodore E. Burton, Esquire, now ex-Senator Burton, when they were opposed to each other for election some 30 years ago. The late H.T. Eubanks, then head waiter at the Waddell House and subsequently a member of the lower house of the General Assembly, found much favor in the sight of Mr. Johnson, and even volunteered his services in assisting him in gaining the goodwill of the colored voters of Cleveland, and as a means to that end prevailed upon Mr. Johnson to invite this writer and the Honorable Harry C. Smith, the author of the Ohio Civil Rights Law, to debate with him all matters of interest to the colored voters involved in the pending congressional election. As a matter of course, we accepted the invitation, and on the appointed evening, in Mr. Johnson's big tent, pitched within our public square, we locked horns. I say locked horns advisedly, for it was some contest, and we fought it out to a finish. Where the victory and honor lay is not for me to say, but this much I will affirm: Mr. Johnson was defeated at the polls, and the late W.J. Akers, for many years proprietor of the Forest City House, one of the leading hotels of Cleveland, was accustomed to say that prior to that debate Mr. Johnson's prospects for election were good, but that from that night to those of Mr. Burton were in the ascendant. Mr. Akers contended that in that meeting Mr. Johnson became the butt and jeer of the crowd in attendance, that the humor spread throughout the district to the discomfiture of the noted gentleman. However, Tom L. Johnson was too big a man to complain. He accepted his defeat philosophically and sought, like another Alexander, some new world railway to conquer. In the year 1897, before answering the call of President McKinley to take office at Washington, I, for the first time since 1857, visited my childhood's home. Few of those whom we had left there were still living, but the Neuse and Trent rivers were there, some of the more substantial buildings were there, and quite a number of the humbler homes. The old courthouse, market house, and Christ's Episcopal Church had been destroyed by fire, but upon the whole the general appearance of the town denoted progress. In Rock Cemetery I found our lot intact, and the inscriptions on the family tombstones and others were still legible. I had the great pleasure of delivering an address in one of the AME churches there to a large audience of colored people, and many reminiscences of the past interested and instructed me. In referring to my visit to my old New Bern home in 1897, I moved to make reference to a grand old man, to the manner born, as the saying goes, who received me into his home for an interesting and to me instructive conversation, full of reminiscences of my childhood days, and who gave me the greater part of the data concerning the Stanley family, which I have related in the beginning of the first chapter. I refer to the late Colonel John D. Whitford, who during a long life of usefulness had contributed towards the growth and prosperity of his native town and state. Colonel Whitford, if I mistake not, was the first president of the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad, which extended from Goldsboro to Elizabeth City, and did much towards putting New Bern on the map. Speaking of social politeness and courtesy, Colonel Whitford said to me, a young man called on me recently, and in conversation with me in answer to one of my questions, he said, "Uh-huh." I said, "There's my door. I'll have no one in my house who uh-huhs me." Such was the old-time gentleman. His kind-hearted brother, the late William Whitford, during mother's heroic struggle for a livelihood, used to credit her for a quart of firewood and then give her sewing to pay for it. I have written this narrative of my life down to the present date in the Blackstone Building during the months of December 1919 and January and February 1920, inclusive, during such vacant spaces of time as I have been able to snatch from the hours of my professional employment. The building in which my son, Captain William R. Green, and I have our offices is the first modern building in which we have been enabled to rent a suite of offices without the intervention of a white man since we have been in the profession, which fact inspires me with the desire to here and now express deep gratitude to Mr. Jacob B. Perkins, the owner of the group of great buildings of which this is one, and also his noble son, Captain Ralph Perkins, his father's alter ego, for their liberal, manly American treatment of us. During my long and eventful life in Cleveland, it has been my pleasure and profit, more or less, to meet in a business and political way 5 members of the illustrious family Perkins, who, leaving their New England homes in the infancy of our great republic, came to this Connecticut Western Reserve, and have done their bit towards making it one of the most liberal, intelligent, patriotic, and wealthy sections in the United States. I first came in contact with the late Edwin R. Perkins when, in the year 1858, he was principal of the historic Mayflower School. I'm sure that the juxtaposition of his fair rule and my body had as much to do with my future development as any and all the instruction which I received from him in the classroom. This Mr. Perkins, who is distantly related to the gentleman whose name I have mentioned, was subsequently president of our Board of Education for a decade, and ultimately developed into the president of one of our great banks and a railway. My next acquaintance was that of the late Joseph Perkins, a gentleman of refinement, large means, and extended business connections. He was one of the foremost minds of the city of Cleveland during his lifetime, and died regretted by the whole business community. Third in order of my acquaintance was the late Senator Henry B. Perkins, whom I met in the Senate of the State of Ohio, when he was an honored and very efficient member of that body. This was at a time when I was a member of the lower branch of the General Assembly of Ohio. The senator was held in high esteem by every one in the State House, from the governor down to the pages, and was greatly missed when his business affairs would no longer admit of his attendance there. The large and substantial business block on the southeastern corner of Frankfort Avenue and West 3rd Street, built and owned by him and now occupied by the Foreman Bassett Company, attests how near and valuable he was to the business interests of Cleveland. Last, but by no means least, I mention my present benefactor, Mr. Jacob B. Perkins, not forgetting that chip off the old block, his worthy son, Captain Ralph Perkins. I've only that mutual acquaintance with Mr. Perkins which exists between a landlord and a tenant, if I except the frequent complimentary mention of him which I have read in the newspapers from time to time. When under the administration of President McKinley I went to take office in Washington, D.C., my exterior wearing apparel consisted of a broadcloth Prince Albert coat with trousers and vest to match, a shirt front of immaculate white containing a conspicuous diamond stud, and a silk hat. I had not been there long before I noticed that I was dressed finer and was far more conspicuous than most of the senators and cabinet officers. It took little time for me to change my costume for one more in keeping with the prevailing style. I mention this fact because of the surprise which I experienced when Mr. Jacob B. Perkins was first pointed out to me, from the works which he had done and the great liberality he had shown in providing the city of Cleveland its first modern office and other buildings, with elevators, and its great and beautiful Edgewater Park, located on the west side, but really and practically used and enjoyed by the whole city. I expected to see a gentleman conspicuous for his elegant and attractive attire, but what was my surprise when I beheld just a plain gentleman, reproducing in his personal appearance what I had beheld in the capital of our nation and amongst the businessmen of some of the commercial centers which I had visited. Plain, practical, easily approached, and apparently oblivious to the fact that he is one of the great builders of this mart of commerce and trade known as the city of Cleveland, rightly the fifth in this great nation. Mr. Perkins, whether actuated by modesty, I cannot say, will not admit that he donated Edgewater Park to the city of Cleveland, but this I know, for it all was accomplished while I was politically in the public eye. If Mr. Jacob B. Perkins did not actually present to the city of Cleveland the land and beautiful lakefront which constitutes the Edgewater Park, he did present a portion of it, and made it possible for our city to obtain the remainder on terms which necessitated a great financial sacrifice on his part. And it ought, in my own estimation, to be named for him, just as Wade Park, Gordon Park, and Rockefeller Park are, respectively, named for their donors. However, Mr. Perkins harks back to that old Simon Perkins, who, when everything here and hereabouts was young and raw, came like Moses Cleveland as a surveyor, and by buying spacious tracts of land laid the foundation for the future welfare and fame of his posterity. May the name Perkins continue illustrious, and their shadows never grow less. 70 years have elapsed since my dear father died in 1850, leaving Sarah 11 years of age, John 5, and Kitty 9 months of age. Today we are all living and able to help ourselves, nor have we during the 70 years last past been afflicted with any serious complaint, a record, I think, for which we should be praising God all the day long. My first dear wife, Annie Walker Green, the mother of all my children, with whom I lived happily and successfully for 43 years, and whose memory will ever be sacredly and cherished in my heart and memory, died on the 15th day of January, 1911, deeply mourned by a large circle of friends of both races. She will be remembered by many for her unselfish generosity and her cheerful disposition. When she died, my whole family was dissolved, and I was left entirely alone and lonesome. In this exigency, remembering the declaration of the Almighty Father of all, that it is not good that man should be left alone, I wooed and won a most estimable and talented lady of Oberlin, Ohio, in the person of Mrs. Lottie Mitchell Richardson, with whom I am passing the evening of my life in a most happy and satisfactory manner. She was the relict of the late Albert Richardson, an educated and highly respected gentleman, who cut off in the noonday of his usefulness left under the care, education, and control of his widow 3 infant children, aged 11 and 6 years and 4 months. 2 of these children are still living. The boy, Fred, a bright and promising lad, when in his 17th year of age and a member of the Glenville High School, was run down by an automobile in charge of a careless, reckless driver and killed when in the act of alighting from a street car. The elder of the girls, after being graduated from the Cleveland High and Normal School systems, taught school in Cleveland for 3 years and is now engaged in social welfare work in New York City, while the youngest child, Helen, is at this writing well advanced in the junior high school system, and by her punctuality and love of letters gives promise of a bright and useful future. Helen has adopted the family name Green, and the love between her and me is mutual. Of my children by my first wife, 3 are still living. The oldest, Captain William R. Green, is still engaged in the practice of law, being recognized as an upright, successful practitioner, earnest and faithful, while he and his beloved wife, Mrs. Agnes Geraldine Green, of whom I have spoken in the 16th chapter of this narrative, are greatly beloved by a large circle of friends of both races in the city of Cleveland. They are both devout Catholics. Mrs. Clara Annie Johnson, the wife of Dr. C.C. Johnson, a pharmacist who is most loving and devoted to his wife and children, is my only daughter. 3 little children bless this union: Phyllis, aged 11, Wendell C., aged 6 years, and Theodore Green Johnson, aged at this writing 14 days. Little Phyllis is fond of her school and studies and gives great promise of a literary career, while the little boy, who also loves his school and is a thorough boy. As for the latest little arrival, let us say, with Wadsworth, heaven lies about us in our infancy. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. Clara, my daughter, is endued with all those womanly graces which go to enhance the usefulness and value of true womanhood. Jessie Bishop Green is a chef, and a good one, whose culinary art has brought pleasure to some of the most exacting of the land. He is fond of his profession or art, and may the future crown him with success. Of those who died in infancy, little Johnny was loving and hopeful, but death claimed him when he was 8 years and 7 months of age. In this connection, perhaps the following reminiscence concerning one of our local artists will be of interest to a large circle of his friends and admirers. I refer to A. M. Willard, Esquire, the painter of Pluck No. 1 and Pluck No. 2, 2 famous sketches which a generation ago furnished much amusement to the people of this country, and also the inspiration and painter of the great canvas known the world over, entitled Yankee Doodle, first exhibited at the Centennial, which was held in Philadelphia in 1876 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the independence of the United States. When our son Johnny died, we had no likeness of him later than the 2nd year of his age, and we were at a loss to know how to obtain one, as he was then 8 years and 7 months of age. In that contingency it occurred to me that if I could persuade Mr. Willard to enter the vault and sketch his features as he lay in the casket, it would supply the deficit. The great artist yielded to my suggestion and got a good likeness of the little deceased boy. Then we were in a quandary as to how to reproduce his eyes, for they were closed and could not be seen by the artist. In that extremity I had recourse to a photo of the child taken when he was 2 years of age, and with this before Mr. Willard added the eyes to the sketch, and to this day we have in our possession a true likeness of Johnny at the time of his death. Truman Handy Green, a dear, sweet little boy, lived only about 7 months. Last but not least, I name my son, the late Theodore Bliss Green, Esquire, an attorney at law of the Ohio bar, a married man, a loving husband, and an affectionate son and brother. Dodie, as his very large circle of friends and admirers termed him, was jovial, good-natured, faithful, and industrious to a fault. He loved his chosen profession and courted it as Lord Coke's jealous mistress. A year or 2 before his death he came within about 100 votes of being elected to a 6-year term as a judge of our municipal court. Dodie was so extremely militant in behalf of the rights and wrongs of the colored people that some regarded him as being supersensitive and did not like him, but that did not worry him. When he believed that his cause was just, he fought for it manfully and persistently to the end. Theodore died at the age of 40 years, young in years, but old in labors and experience. He left behind him only friends, no enemies. His disconsolate widow, Mrs. Edna Jenkins Green, still a young woman, a teacher in our public schools, continues to mourn his loss, while his father, brothers, and sister pray for the repose of his soul. In closing this narrative, I will state that the reports which from time to time have been current as to my acquaintance with the classical languages and literature have been much exaggerated. The fact is that I cannot even boast of Shakespeare's little Latin and less Greek. The best I can say for myself is that I have a mere smattering of the two languages. I tried to study Latin without a teacher, and thereby omitted some of the fundamental instruction at the beginning, which has handicapped me all the way through. As for Greek, I did not give enough time to the study of it to get it thoroughly within my grasp. I've tried to make up for my loss by studying during my later years, but without much success. As for French, I've found the reading of that beautiful language comparatively easy, but I am now reading one of Émile Zola's works entitled La Terre, quite bucolic in its nature, which requires much use of the lexicon. So I would advise all my young friends who may honor me by reading this story of my life to be quite thorough in their early stages of any study if they expect to be proficient therein. The changes which have transformed a few comparatively ignorant colored people of the day of my arrival here into a multitude of cultured and refined persons of the present day have been truly marvelous. Certainly there were in Cleveland at that time a cultured and refined society of well-to-do colored people who owned their own homes, possessed trades and definite occupations, and were fairly well educated, but they had not even thought of holding public offices, and depended upon a decision of our state Supreme Court for the right to vote, since the Constitution of the state of Ohio then as now restricted the electoral to all white male citizens. But since then we have many times duplicated our numbers, have grown along intellectual, aesthetic, and financial lines, have added to our numbers many members in all the professional, artistic, and mercantile pursuits, and have been elected to serve in some of the most honorable public offices within the gift of a generous people. In the General Assembly of the State we can name, in regular order of their election, the following: 1. The writer of this narrative. 2. Honorable Jerry A. Brown. 3. Honorable Harry C. Smith. 4. Honorable William H. Clifford. 5. Honorable Henry T. Eubanks. In 1873 and continuously until 1882, this writer was elected triennially and for 9 consecutive years discharged the functions of Justice of the Peace of Cleveland Township, and during a portion of that time Messrs. Parker Hare, Lewis W. Turner, and J. H. Washington, all colored men, were elected and discharged the duties of constable in the same township. Thomas W. Fleming, Esquire, colored gentleman of great popularity and much executive ability, has on 3 occasions been elected a member of the Council of the City of Cleveland, once at large. Mr. Fleming is at this writing chairman of the Council Committee on Police, etc. Numerous men of our race class have been appointed, and most of them are now serving on our splendid police force. And what seems to this narrator one of the greatest achievements of our class in Cleveland is the fact that many of our educated, cultured, and refined daughters, after strict examinations, have been appointed teachers in our public schools. Along the line of journalism, for many years the colored people of Cleveland have been represented by men of more or less ability, all of whom have rung true to the interests of our race. Taking them in order of time, I can now recall H. C. Smith, R. A. Jones, L. W. Puleys, Welcome T. Blue, Nahum D. Brasher, Orman A. Fort, and Professor S. William A. B. Could some of our old colored pioneers who have gone to rest come amongst us today and note the wonderful progress which we have made since their day, notably old Father John Malvin, who gave of his time, money, and almost his life in the anti-slavery cause, and Ellen Medlin, J.R. Warren, Elisha Freeman, Benjamin S. Green, David Crosby, J.H. Weaver, Cicero M. Richardson, George Boasberg, Elders J.R. Warren and J.P. Underwood, Buckner and John Simmons, E.L. Sweet, and dear old centenarian Mrs. Polly Simmons, not to mention many others who did right valiantly in the cause of liberty, good government, and worthy citizenship. How surprised and happy they would be! Truly, this is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. End of Fact Stranger Than Fiction by John Patterson Green.